The market has changed from a nurturing market to a performance-driven market, and that's happened probably over the last 6 to 9 months.
Has budgets completely retreated to CFOs, and are CFOs shut for business?
Yes, budget, everything goes to the CFO, but no, they're not shut down for business. Every renewal is a new deal. The first question my CFO asked me is, what if you didn't have it? And that's what every CFO is asking. I think revenue ops is probably the most valuable role in a company.
What do you think RevOps gives you so much of?
I would say,
Steve, I am so excited for this. I've got off a couple of reference calls now that just said what an absolute freaking hero you are. So thank you so much for joining me today.
absolutely. I was really looking forward to it. And I'm really curious to hear what you have to say, actually.
Well, I mean, listen, we'll save the 40th birthday party for later. I want to start. I think there's often a moment where someone like falls in love with sales. When did you first fall in love with sales, Steve?
I didn't even know I fell in love with it. It just kind of naturally happened. I was a psychology major in college, and I was a sports psychology major, and I played baseball through college, and I was a catcher. And as a catcher, your job is to kind of manage the field, manage the team, manage everybody's momentum and motivation. And I have to go into the pitcher's mound a lot when the pitcher was down and kind of bring him back up. And I was just so fascinated by psychology. And I didn't realize how important psychology was in the business world until I actually got into sales. And I always thought sales had a negative connotation when I was growing up. And when I first got into sales, I was afraid to say I was in sales because of that negative connotation. And then at one point I realized that, you know what, I'm going to embrace this because salespeople are problem solvers and they help your customers solve their problems, which makes your customers at the end of the day look really good and hopefully get promoted and move through their career. And there was just one gotcha moment where I was actually working with Gateway Computers, and I was up there and I walked in there saying, you know what, I'm in sales and I'm here to sell you something, but I'm here to help you solve your problem. And I embraced it. And I realized that at that moment that salespeople are problem solvers and they're psychologists. And I just fell in love with it from that aspect.
It's really interesting that because actually David said to me beforehand that one of your greatest skills is knowing your customers. And so I guess my question to you is, how do you get to know your customers so well? What questions do you ask? How do you unveil what they really need?
Well, there's a business side and a personal side. And you always have to understand everybody's business motivation and their personal motivation, and more about what motivates them in work and outside of work. And once you understand that, you understand more about them, more about their personal life, their professional life, you really can help just relate to them and what they're trying to do and how you're going to help solve their problems, both personally and professionally. And I just always look at, I always look at what their personal win is and what their professional win is.
How do you find out what their personal and professional is? Do you ask them?
You ask them. You have questions. You have conversations. You naturally just have conversation. Really quickly, I think one of the things that I've been able to do is I could pretty quickly tell people's body language, people's kind of where their head's at. You do the research, you follow them, you research them, you understand what they talk about, maybe a little bit of their background, if they went to college, where they went to college, did they play sports, what sports team do they like, where they're from, and where people are from, where people grew up. You just kind of figure out how to correlate with them. And, it's just one of those things where I've just naturally always been able to kind of dig into it and get to the personal side of the relationship.
It's funny, I had Chris Degnan on the show, who's CRO at Snowflake, recently, and I can't remember the number. When you get to my age, Steve, memory is not quite what it used to be, but I think it was 8 or maybe 4, one of the two, 4 or 8. But he said 4 or 8 calls with new prospects is all that you can do as a rep per week if you really want to be prepared and ready. Do you agree with that? Or do you think in the early days for young reps, it's about volume, it's about at-bats, reading as many people as possible, just go, go, go? How do you think about that depth, breadth?
One thing, Chris Degnan's a really good friend of mine. Chris Degnan is my brother's best friend. He was the best man at my brother's wedding, Chris and I were, and Chris has spent many, many nights on my couch when we were growing up when he was moving out to San Francisco. And a perfect example of Chris, Chris went to University of Delaware with my brother. Chris is from Massachusetts. He's from Lincoln Sudbury. He's from, I believe he might have played lacrosse there. And I've just, him and I started off at Aerotech together, and then he went to EMC. And so going back to your previous conversation, I've known Chris for a long time, and I think Chris is a phenomenal person, and he's just a good person. I don't know about how many you can make, because I think it's all about quality, not quantity. And if you make 2, but they're very quality, and the next week you make 2 more, but it's quality, it's really, really important. And so I just think you got to be smart. You got to do the research. You got to understand who you're talking to and what you're talking about to make sure that you're catching them at the right time.
I totally agree in terms of catching them at the right time. You also need to make sure that you're speaking to a buyer. How do you know if you're speaking to a buyer, Steve? And I did have a schedule, but this is far too enjoyable, so fuck it. How do you know if they're a buyer, and how do you get there?
So one thing I always look at, especially when we're building our internal sales process and our structure around our process, is when you're selling to somebody within a large organization. Now, if you sell to an enterprise company, like a large enterprise company, they're politicians. You sell to a smaller SMB commercial company, they're operators. And 2 very different ways to sell to them. I try to put myself in not only their shoes, but the people's shoes that they're actually selling to within their organization to get something done. And if they're respectable enough that the people, like a CFO, would listen to them and how they would be perceived within their company. And one of the questions I always ask my sales team is, the person you're selling to that you think is a buyer, typically, especially in this day and age, they're not a single sole buyer that they make all the decisions. They have to go to many different people. And when the CFO is putting pressure on them, or their CEO is putting pressure on them, how are they going to take to that? Are they going to commit to it? Are they going to say, I'm willing to commit to more because I'm going to consume this technology or this service? And you can very quickly realize in that process if they're truly a buyer or not, or what part of the buying process they go to, or how they need to get to other people to help make decisions.
What are signs that someone's not a buyer? Where would you be like, oh, Harry, we've got a sign that we may need to go through someone else here?
Well, one, if they tell you they're the buyer. People who usually tell you they're the buyer, they typically aren't. And if they tell you don't talk to anyone else, just talk to me, I can navigate through this myself. Because you've got to be able to work together let's talk about an enterprise company right now. A lot of enterprise companies at the beginning of every year, people switch roles. So if you're selling to a very large enterprise company, you could be the CIO one day, and then next year you could be the CRO. They move roles quite a bit. Or if you're the CMO and you've been there for, say, 4 months, and you're actually on your way, you want to break some things, you want to try some things, you're kind of in the honeymoon, so you can actually take that chance. You got to look at a company and how often they switch people's roles in the organization and what the tenure of that role typically is. And if they're 2 years into a role as a CMO, they might not have as much power as they did when they were like a year into that role.
Why is that? I thought you would have more power as time accrues because you establish yourself more, you're maybe more successful, you've proven yourself. No?
Well, not all the time. I mean, that's why you have to look at the culture of the company you're selling to and the typical time people are in a role. There's always people that, and remember, politicians in very large companies are always trying to find their next way up. So you've got to find people that are on their way up, not on their way out. And it's really important to navigate through that when you're selling to these larger companies.
How do you find someone who's on their way up, not on their way out?
You could tell by their behavior. You could tell by how they communicate. You could tell by how they talk. You could tell by their body language in a meeting. You could tell by, if you're in a meeting with them and other people, are they actually showing authority in that? Are they controlling the conversation? Are they controlling the meeting? And it's just, if most people out there, they look at the deals they've done, the big deals they've done, they've always had a change agent in there that's driving through the process, that's navigating through their own process. And you just got to look at that person. And I think what David told you earlier on was that I was able to always figure out where the true champion is in an organization and where the true change agent is in the organization. And that is really where the art, it's hard to teach that to a lot of your salespeople. When you talk about MedPick and you talk about Medic, a lot of people check boxes there. You can't let them check boxes. You've got to be able to ask the questions like we're talking about right now to ensure that that person really, truly is a champion of change.
Sorry, is the champion always the change maker? Is sometimes the change maker separate from the champion? Do they differ sometimes? Is that like a chief innovation officer and like a CFO, or are they often the same profile?
No, it could be a director in certain accounts. It could be a senior director. The economic buyer could be the CFO, but the change agent could be a senior director of revenue operations who wants to be a vice president or a senior vice president who wants to make a mark on something because they believe it so much that they're going to drive it through the organization because that's their next promotion.
Is it a good excuse if I'm one of your reps and I say, Steve, we nearly had it. Okay, we nearly had it, but then our champion left. I'm really sorry. It wasn't my fault. Our champion left. Is that not our fault and it's an externality? Or is that you should have known? Is it a good excuse to have a champion leave to lose a deal?
No, it's not a good excuse because there's never just like one champion. There's multiple people as part of the process. Part of it's always never the seller's fault. We talk about why we do deal reviews, why we have first line managers to really coach and manage their people. You do that so you minimize the surprises that happened at the end. And you've got to naturally always be looking and always have these conversations with people, going back to what is their personal win. If you go back and understand what this person's personal win is, you'll start to get a sense of how long they're going to be at that company or not. If they trust you remember, salespeople, the negative connotation versus I'm a problem solver, I'm here to help you get to your next role. And if they trust you, they may open up to you and say, hey, look, I'm not going to be here that long. I'm thinking about moving on. Like, you've got to build that trust in these relationships. If not, you will get surprised. You will get surprised. And in that case, I never say it's your fault, but bad news never travels better with age, like wine. And you've got to really, suss that out early and go with your gut.
I remember Dev at MongoDB, the CEO there, told me the best thing ever. He said the different types of news travel at different speeds. Good news travels fast. Bad news is very slow. I thought that was a really good piece of advice that I always remember. You mentioned deal reviews there, Steve. I'm a total novice here. I'm a first-time founder. How should I do deal reviews? How often should I do them? What makes a good versus a bad one? Can you help me understand how to do deal reviews well?
Yeah. So one, it's really the first line manager needs to own the deal reviews. They need to own the process. My job is to design and architect the whole overall system that people work within. So if I'm asking my second line and third line managers 5 questions, they need to be asking their teams the same 5 questions or the same 10 questions. Their deal reviews are different at different stages of a quarter, for an example, or different stages of a year. At the beginning of the quarter, you're going to be asking a different set of questions because you're really going to just try to get an understanding of what's happening. But the whole goal of deal reviews are to understand why not something is going to happen, but also understand how do we actually untie knots? Because manager's job and my job is to help untie knots.
Can I just pause on that? I want to make sure that I don't miss stuff, which is great. When you say at the beginning of the quarter, it's different, we want to understand what's happening. What are we trying to understand, and why are we trying to understand it for forecasting, for projections? Help me understand our objectives on what we're understanding and why.
Well, we're trying to understand power. We're trying to understand, one, do we truly understand the problem we're trying to solve? Do we truly understand what our unique value proposition is in that process? And has the buyer bought off on that? And then you go through the MedPick process and understand, what do we know, what don't we know? And MedPick is really just a qualification process. And the goal at the beginning of the quarter is to understand what you don't know. You look at org charts, but by the middle of the quarter, at some point, what I usually lock in on, and by the middle of the quarter, we have to have agreed upon mutual plans in place and alignment on how we actually get to the end of the quarter. And then we have to measure that nonstop to continue to track all the activities that needs to happen. But obviously you're going to close business early in the quarter as well. But if you've got that process in place every quarter, then you're going to have more consistency in actually closing business and not just waiting to the end of the quarter.
What makes a bad deal review?
When people aren't being honest.
Do you know when they're not being honest?
That's the goal of enabling that. The first line manager is the most important kind of aspect of any process because they're the ones that have to be having the one-on-ones weekly and daily. They're the ones that have to be able to understand that. So when I do deal reviews, not only do we do deal reviews with the sellers, but I also do deal reviews separately with the first line managers, and then you triangulate.
How do they differ with the sellers versus the first line managers?
Well, you talked about Dave Rernitsky for an example. Dave Rernitsky is the master at forecasting, the master at forecasting. I've worked for Dave for probably 10 years, and he had his forecast call every Friday at 10 o'clock. And you had to be prepared for that meeting because he would go through every opportunity and he'd go through every one. We'd have seller notes, next steps, and manager notes, next step. And he'd be like, all right, Steve, this deal, talk about it. Tell me what's going on. And he'd go into so much detail. And if he figured out what there was a gap, he would just dig into that gap. And then we'd move on. And so I would do the same thing with my team. And then they would do the same thing because I couldn't show up unprepared. So what it does was it really minimized surprises. He would go through the month, every deal in the month, in every deal in CTP, every deal in best case, and every deal in long shot.
How many chances do you give people, Steve? In an ideal world, and I don't mean this arrogantly, but everyone's like me and you, and what I mean by that is fucking machines. Sadly, not everyone is a machine, or not everyone knows that 10 o'clock Friday, you got to be on. How many chances do you give people when it's not quite there?
The market has changed from a nurturing market to a performance-driven market. And that's happened probably over the last 6 to 9 months. And it was really hard to drive that process in place because people would like to be asked questions, for example. But we still drove that process. And in my experience, when I grew up, I was at Siebel and I was at Salesforce. If you showed up once and didn't have it together, you maybe got invited back twice, but there was no third time if you didn't have it. And that's just the environment I grew up in. Now, the market's not like that as it is today, but the expectation, the discipline that is getting back to that model, like the market is getting back to driving that process. And a lot of the people that have grown up in this industry over the past, say, 5 to 10, 7, 8 years, they haven't seen this.
Are they ready for it, Steve?
I don't think they are. I think there's a set of people that are. I think there's a broader set of people that are not. And you can see it when it doesn't work out in your Glassdoor reviews, for an example. If you're saying you're going to be a performance-driven culture, you've got to be a performance-driven culture, and you're going to get some challenging Glassdoor reviews out there. You're going to get people saying some negative things, but you've got to commit to it, and you've got to commit to that process. But if you're consistent with it, and you have to have integrity, you don't treat people poorly, you treat people with the utmost respect in this process, but you've got to be able to ask the questions because, to your point earlier, it's really not okay when you get surprised towards the end. It's really not. And if it happens once, okay. If it happens twice, now you start to get some consistency in the same people that are missing it multiple times. Then you got to start looking at the first line managers like, well, how are you missing this?
Can I ask you, when it comes to those people who have what it takes in that performance-driven culture, who thrive on that chase and the unwillingness to accept losing and that bluntly grit, how do you test for that in interviews? How do you see it in someone before you hire them?
I'm from Massachusetts. I'm a Patriots fan. I'm a Bill Belichick fan. I know it's not probably the most popular thing to say right now, but what he does, just because he hasn't really changed with the times recently, but the people that he recruits and that he brings on to the team are typically people who have a lot of grit. They have a lot, like they were captains of their programs, or they were, really kind of leaders in school, and they were really competitive. And so, one, you've got to really look for grit. And what we do in our interview process, one of the most valuable things, is we do top grades with everybody. And in a top grade, we'll spend 2 to 3 hours with you, and we'll have you walk us through your life. Walk us through the decisions you made in elementary school that you can remember. You got to be your freshman year, and you decided, say you had a coach, and you decided you were a quarterback, and you decided, hey, I'm going to go be a receiver. Well, walk me through, like, how'd you make that decision? And then, okay, so now you're in college and you went to this school. Why did you go, you had two decisions to make. Why'd you go here versus here?
What do you want to see in asking those questions?
I want to see how people make decisions. I want to see people's thought process for how they make decisions. I want to see if people could be consistent and they don't just give up. They don't just give up. They actually have grit, and they are out there to they're obsessed with winning, and they're very competitive. And you look for trends that people make throughout their life, and you look for consistencies. And it's been really helpful because you can really start to assess. You're just looking for trends. And then you look at their career, for an example, and if they jumped around, like, tell me why you left this role to go to this role. Tell me why, okay, you started off as an SDR, you were there for 9 months, and then you went to another company to be an SDR. Well, why didn't you wait? What happened? How'd you make that decision? Then you start to look for trends of scenarios, and you could start to assess. And what you see is when you miss, you can look at backwards and people that didn't work out at your company, the same trends that you caught. They maybe admired the problem in the interview process, and you were just trying to fill street quota, and you didn't dig in deep enough.
It's so funny you say that about kind of bouncers, as I call them, people who move between roles a lot. The other thing I look for is like superfluous statements without data. Like if you say, hey, I increased, I don't know, MQLs by 300% across these 3 channels through these 3 methods. I'm like, oh, wow, that's like data to prove, attribution. What other signs for you are like, like that's not good. They don't have that.
Well, everybody back channels in an interview process. Like a lot of people don't understand why they didn't get the job because people back channel. Because everybody, you know people, you grew up through people, and somebody will also back channel because we may know people they worked with or people that knew people, and we'll back channel and be like, hey, is this accurate? Tell me a little more about so and so, and how do they handle this situation? And so you really have to. You can't just take people's word for it. You've got to really back channel to make sure that, you can validate everything that someone's telling you.
Steve, do you do case studies as part of the hiring process?
We don't, but that's actually a good idea. We actually don't.
Why don't you? I always think it's kind of, the hard thing is, do you do a case study on your company or on their company? There's pros and cons, but why don't you?
You mean, do they present a case study?
Yeah, like do they do a demo pitch and present?
No, but you gave me an idea that where I thought you were going was, do we do case studies on people that we brought in and follow on like 2-3 years down the road, or maybe a year down the road, how they're doing? And I think that's actually a good idea. I'm going to actually look into that.
Well, thank you. I didn't actually mean that, but you can, totally give me credit for that. Thank you, Steve. No, I mean like actually like, hey, sell me this pen.
Yeah, what we do is case studies, for an example. So we'll have them come in and do discovery, because our business is very big on discovery and making sure you clearly understand the problem you're solving, especially in this day and age. Like you have to be solving problems. People don't buy features. They solve problems. And it has to be the biggest problem, the top 3 problems a company has. So we go through a process where they have to do a discovery call with a sales leader, a couple sales leaders, and really go through that due diligence, and then come back and present the unique value problem, the business case, and how they would, and also the how. A lot of people focus on the what. We also have them present the how. Like, how are you going to help us get to that problem, and how are you going to help us solve that problem? Not just what you're going to do to solve that problem. And so we absolutely go through that as a big part of our process.
You said there, especially now, you need to be solving a top 3 problem. Everyone says 2 things. 1, budget has completely retreated back to the CFO. And then 2, CFOs just aren't buying new technology. So 2 questions. Has budgets completely retreated to CFOs? And are CFOs shut for business?
Yes, budget, everything goes to the CFO. But no, they're not shut down for business. We actually just did one of the bigger deals in the company history just very recently. And back in the financial crisis in 2008, when I was at Salesforce, we did some of the biggest deals at the time in the company history at that point. When you have problems and there's change going on, people solve big problems, and they will solve it outside of their budget cycle. But you've got to really, truly make sure that you're solving really big problems. And by the way, every renewal is a new deal too. You have to treat every renewal, because every renewal is going to the CFO. The first question my CFO asked me is, somebody's up for a renewal, is what if you didn't have it?
Does this mean that vitamins are dead and that only painkillers survive?
Yeah, which is going back to the previous conversation around high performance cultures, is that it's so, because companies are doing more with less. A lot of companies out there have restructured. Big companies had tons of overlays that can help kind of talk about features and functions. They really don't anymore. Smaller companies have minimized their street quota and lowered their targets, but they're putting more emphasis on doing more with less, and really focus a lot on enablement. You have to be able to truly enable your teams. Like our view is, my CFO talks about this a lot, is this year is about getting better. Next year is about getting bigger. And you got to get better with a core group, because great people want to be surrounded by great people. Great people want to be around people that are like them, and building that culture and instilling it into them around making sure that we're truly solving the biggest problem a company has, number one. And number two, you found the change agents or in an organization that want to make change.
Do you not think they're slightly conflicting when you think about that? Say better this year, building a more efficient, more kind of high velocity machine, better, and then bigger, more people, more revenue, more this, more this, more. They're kind of conflicting, aren't they? To assume you can maintain better while bigger is, I think, realistically impossible.
Well, let me give you a couple of examples of that. So, like you ever been on a beach and it looks beautiful, the sun's setting, tide's in, looking outside, it's like, it looks beautiful, right? Looks incredible. Then all of a sudden the tide goes out. And now you're looking at if the sun's down, wow, there's a huge reef over there. Oh my God, there's a shipwreck over there. Like, look at all those rocks. I had no idea those were there. Well, that's what's happened this year. You have to change your process. And so what we found, for an example, two things that we did this year. So we have a commercial business, which is about 1 employee to 750 employees. And we had a hunter-farmer model in that commercial business where we had sellers would sell a deal and they would own it for a year. Then they'd pass it off to an AM who would just farm. And in the past, people were just adding on 100 licenses every year because they were growing at huge rates. But what happened in the past year was that these account managers were just hanging out with the same people that they sold the original deal to. And instead of buying 100 licenses, they're like, I only have 50 people at the company now. So we saw a lot of downgrades. So we shifted to a hunter-hunter model. And we shifted our process, and we basically told our account managers essentially that we had to change the profile of a salesperson, of an AM, to a hunter. And everybody had an interview for their role. And we opened it up to the outside, and their job, and we took the renewal away from the AM. We moved it to a renewal manager in CS. We are now calling them a account executive who owns new logos. 3 months, they all own it. Maybe a couple they can keep. Then right away, they pass it over to a client account exec whose job is to build relationships across the organization, to find new use cases that they can sell into, not just hang out with the same people. So we went through this whole process change this year because the old way was not working. We were just getting downgrade after downgrade. And a lot of it was because we were selling into other use cases. We were just hanging out with the people we sold to. And they didn't have as many people to support.
I love this detail. So we have this, hunter, they sell 3 months, great. How do you do the handoff of, hey, meet enablement CS manager who you've never met before. They're going to own this relationship now. Good luck. How do you do that?
That's the second thing we changed. You have to bring the CS team into the selling process. Remember I talked to you about the what and the how? Mm-hmm. The CS team is the how. So you bring them into the pre-sales process so the customer can feel comfortable with the customer journey and how you're going to make them successful. And they've got the confidence in that. So they know what they're buying into early on. And then we build these production environments because we're in a very competitive market. Our market is. Everybody says they kind of do the same thing with similar value props. So we have to go in there and say, all right, we're going to build this production environment and we're going to align to a use case. We're going to build out the business case. And then we're going to put it in production and show you exactly how we're going to do this. So you're going to understand what it's like to work with us even before you're a customer. And our win rate and attach rate to that is pretty incredible, actually, as we go into this year. So we made all these changes this year. And I've heard some of other CROs talk about the handoff and they do it after the implementation. You've got to do it. You got to do it as part of the early selling process. What makes us unique is our ability to make our customers successful, meaning they get to the specific outcomes they're looking for. But it's so hard to show that in a sales process. So you've got to actually show that. They got to see what it's like to work with you.
Dude, you ever chatted to Chris Degnan about CS? He goes, you know what I did when I came into Snowflake? I got rid of all CS. No more CS. I don't believe in it. What do you think of that?
I've talked to him about this actually a while ago. And look, every business is different. Like his business could be different than my business. I mean, they're more on the data side. We're on the workflow side. And we've got to we have to integrate with our customers' business processes so they can get to specific outcomes. And we've got to integrate with different systems. We have multiple use cases that we constantly have to work with. We got to leverage AI and insights to show them how they're doing. And in our world, I think that the skill set of a CS person is different. The skill set is, we were at Salesforce back early on in the day, we created a customer success manager. We were the first companies to do it. It hasn't changed since then. It really hasn't. They're really, a lot of customer success organizations are really a first line for support because they're hanging out with the people. Remember I told you about, they're hanging out with the people that they sold the first product to, and they're just answering questions. They're not able to be proactive. They're not able to get strategic. They're not able to help them get to these outcomes because they're just solving how-to problems with like the admins and the operations people. And so I think what Chris is talking about doing is that he probably believes, and I believe this as well, that a lot of times when you're losing customers is you lose access to the buyers. You lose access to the people of power because you do a deal, you're up here. All of a sudden you're implementing it. Now you're kind of down here. And then when it's implemented, now you're down here. You've got to stay up here. You've got to stay across the organization. So in that
how do you stay up there?
You got to change your process. You got to change your profile of the people you're bringing in. Like the way I was explaining to you is that you've got to change the profile of the people you're putting into those roles.
Do you still need CEOs to close big deals? You said about coming in up here. Do CEOs need to come in to close large 6-figure deals or 7-figure deals?
Well, one, CEOs should never be RVPs. They should never be the ones that are actually closing deals. That's my job. CEOs should give the customer the confidence about our vision and what we are doing as a company. I'd never like to put my CEO in a position where he or she is having a closed business. Their job is to align with others, maybe CEO and other executives, to give them comfort that they're making the right bet on the right company. They should not be closing business. But I strongly believe when you do big deals, they buy into your company. They buy into your culture. They buy into your innovation. They buy into what you're doing. And you've got so many tentacles within your organization that they buy into you. And it's kind of called the shiny penny in a way. You become the shiny penny of each other's companies and everybody rallies around them. So it's not just the CEO. It's multiple people in the organization. It's aligning CFOs. It's aligning chief technology officers. It's aligning chief product officers. And it's aligning CEOs, and that's the job. It's the connections.
So you'll understand after this question why I'm asking it. What's a sales playbook to you, Steve?
I think it's different in each segment. It's different in terms of if you're selling into a commercial business or you're selling into an enterprise business, it's got to be designed and architected into those businesses. It is the kind of gravitational pull that you want to drive within your process to make sure that the sales process is set up so it's on your wheelhouse. So everybody's competing with you, and it's got to be consistent in how you do it. And it's got to be very tactical and very strategic. And so my job is to architect those across an enterprise business and across a commercial business and make sure that you want to give people some of the flexibility, like their managers some flexibility, but they've got to work in your framework.
Okay, Steve, I need your help on this one. I believe strongly something. Many others disagree with me on this. Very different views. The founder should create the sales playbook. Do you agree with me, or do you think the sales leader should create the sales playbook? The first one.
The first one, you mean as a startup company?
As a startup company, they need to create the sales playbook. What's your messaging? Who's your ICP? How do you sell to them? What's the pricing? V1 needs to be a founder.
It's funny. I had a conversation with our previous founder, Kyle Porter, who was phenomenal person. And he was so passionate about our company and our product and our features. And him and I would talk about this a lot. And he'd say, Steve, what I realized when you and I met was that I can convince one person to do anything about my product. I can convince one person that our product is the best product ever. But what you help us do as a company, is convince multiple people in a company that we can solve their problem and it's great for them and they got to move down the process. And so that was kind of an aha moment when I got here. We were about 50 million in revenue. And we got there early on, like just being so passionate about what we do. But we didn't have a process. We were really great about talking about our product and our functionality. And we were a product company at that point. We weren't a platform. And we shifted now to be more of a platform. And it's a very different sell. So when you sell a product, what I found is most founders are so passionate about it. And passion gets you to a point. But at some point, you got to get to a point that you need a process. Most founders are very passionate with what they do. Maybe their product maybe they're more on the product side or more on the marketing side or more on the industry side, but not many have like the experience in a go-to-market and like in building like an enterprise company, an enterprise process. And I think that's a much different world where you need like RevOps and enablement, and you need to put like infrastructure in place. And I don't think that most founders have that experience.
I know it's different for different segments. I know it's different for different companies, but just baseline bastardize it for me. RevOps enablement. When's the right time to hire your first in each? 10 million in revenue, your first, massive logo. When's that trigger, Harry?
I think revenue ops is probably the most valuable role in a company. And you're going to start to see the evolution of RevOps be moving into the CRO world when you start bringing data and science together. I think you want to hire an analyst, like a really good analyst early on at about, say, 5 million to really start to analyze your processes. Because a great CEO, very passionate, but they got to be able to make decisions based on data, not just based on gut. By 5 million, you're going to start to use some data and some AI that you can start to incorporate some AI. So you want to hire a really smart analyst. And as you grow to 10 million, maybe 2 analysts. When you get to 20 million, you're going to need someone who's got some management experience, kind of seeing that ship around really building a strong kind of RevOps organization. RevOps, to me, I couldn't survive without I've got an incredible RevOps leader.
What do you think RevOps gives you so much of?
The blind spots is that they're constantly looking at the data and analyzing the data to understand where their blind spots are.
Can you give me an example? Sorry, I know it's detailed, but I'm just trying to understand what is an example of a blind spot that a good RevOps team would give you? One
of the reasons that we changed our processes that I just talked to you about earlier is that we were starting to see, based on our data, that we were seeing more churn because of the way our processes were set up, where the AMs were seeing more downgrades, but they weren't seeing cancellations. They were seeing more downgrades of users just downgrading in certain segments of the market. So in like companies that we were selling to, tech companies that sold to other tech companies. So we saw that and we had to stop that trend right away. So we started to change our process around a set of data that we saw in the market quickly. That's one example.
On enablement, I had Henry Schuck, the CEO of ZoomInfo, on the show, and he said that actually kind of aligned to what you were saying there about kind of downgrades but not cancellations. He was saying years past, people just upgrade more seats. Great. Wonderful world to live in. Now, not only do they not upgrade, but they want data on usage. Prove to me that you're valuable in my org. Show me usage, show me whatever that is, transactions, requests, whatever we want. Are you seeing a change in how you structure your team to service the requests of buyers?
Yeah, you have to be very proactive about it. You have to, it goes back to the skill sets you put in the post-sales side. So they can start to look at data to show their customers the insights and the value that you're creating for them. And remember, the CFO is the buyer now for every renewal. If you're not showing them insights around business value, then you're not going to be renewed.
Do you do that continuously throughout the year?
We've changed our whole adoption strategy to outcomes versus adoption, because nobody cares if I come to you and say, here's how many logins you have. Here's how many activities you had. What you want to know is, what has my pipeline metrics been, and how am I coming in every quarter to my pipeline targets, and what are my outcomes around revenue that I'm driving with your platform? And so we've changed our whole adoption metrics to outcome metrics. And we know all the leading indicators that get the outcomes, and we've designed health scores around every single one of our customers. And we could be proactive when it triggers from a green to a yellow, and what created that we'll all of a sudden start to drive, leveraging our platform, workflow and activity and thought leadership and content out to them, and the CSM will follow right up once we see something change.
You said activity, thought leadership, content. Is that ABM, like, hey, here's actually like marketing material that kind of fits you and kind of could be interesting? Or is this like deep analysis on your business use case?
It's deep analysis on their business use case. And it's deep analysis on where they get stuck on a 3-step cadence, but they're not running it through a 5-step cadence. And we see if that's happening, if we see some integrations are off, we can get really proactive and fix them proactively. And then we have these EBRs that we run every quarter with our customers. And we have processes in place on how we do that. We meet with, that's how you get higher in the organization. We meet with, the leaders in the organization and show them the insights of what they're doing with recommendations on how to improve.
What's your biggest advice? As you mentioned with Salesloft, it's bluntly, it's a noisy landscape, and there's a lot of people who say they do the same thing. The product messaging and marketing is quite similar in a lot of cases. What would be your biggest advice to founders who are in noisier markets where a lot of people say the same things?
You got to focus on the how, and you got to stay maniacally focused on the how. And you got to talk about how you are delivering for your customers. A lot of companies focus on the what. You just talked about, there's a lot of what out there. Here's what we do. Here's our value prop. Here's how we do that. Focus on like what you're delivering for them and how you're going to help them. But you got to prove it. You got to show them every single day. And you've got to be maniacally focused on showing them the how, because a lot of people just focus on the what. And you got to, it goes back to solving the right business problem, but you got to constantly be in front of them, showing them how you're helping them, how you're helping them hit these targets, how you're helping them solve the problems. Not only when you get the deal done, when you get the deal done, the relationship just starts.
Steve, I get you. I love the how. But, ex-competitor, they're going to give me a 20% discount. It matters nowadays. My budgets are tight. How do you feel about discounting? And is there a right time, or should it be a flat no always?
So no, it should never be a flat no, but I care more about what's in the contract than how much they're paying us. Meaning, like in our business being a workflow platform, there's consulting capabilities that we need to bring into the process. There's like support and services pieces in there. And I want to make sure that the relationship is set up so they can be self-sustaining and that we can integrate truly into their workflow. So I care more about that. And procurement cares a lot about, I want to see what my per unit price is. They want to understand like what their per unit price is. So we can work with them on making sure we fit within their budgeting cycle. But I care a lot about making sure the customer is set up for success, because we're negotiating many, many deals right now or all the time. And my point to them would be, yeah, you may look good because you got this per unit price down. But in 6 months from now, when the business unit comes to you and says, well, I'm not getting any value out of the product, then how are you going to feel then? And so we've got to figure out and meet somewhere in the middle, because yeah, we'll make sure we give you the right structure that's in place. I always try to get, and I coach my team on, you always want to you don't want any winners or losers in these negotiations. You really want to try to avoid that, and you don't want any take it or leave it. You want to work with them to figure out at the end of the day how you can both feel good about the relationship. Because when procurement leaves, when the buying leaves, you're focusing on helping them be successful. And, you want to kind of get through the contract, but you don't want a bad contract to dictate a bad relationship.
You focus a lot on relationships. Like you hear this time and time again in the way that you speak. Something that I find goes against it is like, how do we encourage urgency in a deal cycle? How do we encourage urgency, like close? And it kind of just feels like it goes against the solving Steve's problem. How do you balance between that needing to close and urgency of closing in a quarter with, I get it, Steve, it may not be optimal for you to sign right now. You've got this big thing happening. Have another week. How do you balance that urgent with the personal?
I think there's a respect component of that where you build relationships and you're working towards a moment in time where you got to have a tough conversation. And you don't want to have it to be a surprise. You don't want to ever do anything unnatural. But at the end of the day, we do work in months and quarters. And there's going to be times throughout the relationship that you're going to ask me for something and I'm going to ask you for something. Right now, what I'm asking you for, not to do anything unnatural, but if you can do it in this timeline, we'd appreciate it. You don't have to, but we would really appreciate it. But that's why the mutual plan is so important. So you're not just having to do something unnatural and throw a Hail Mary at the end of the quarter, end of the month. I mean, that happens in certain cases, but if you align on the deal reviews and the process and the structure, you're having these conversations and you're aligning towards a plan to be able to do something in a timeline that works for both of you. And you talk about compelling events and how do you back into compelling events. And, I think that's also really important. But at the end of the day, I do think relationships matter, because a procurement person, if they're told what to do by the buyers, they'll work towards those dates. I think you've got to have those relationships, because you're going to win and lose a deal 100 times before you actually win it. And you're going to feel like you've lost. The deal's done. You've got to be okay with that. But you got to pick it up every day and you got to figure out how to bring it back together, because you're going to lose it 3 or 4 times during the day. And, you've just got to be able to pick it up. And if you don't have those tentacles, you go back to CEOs. Do they have to close business? What's really important is that you're not single threaded in an account, and you've got your managers and all the different people. I call selling as a team sport. our organization, I've never been in an environment where it's, here's your territory, go read me the news. We make the news together. And so it's a team sport. We sell together. So very rarely do we have a deal that we only have one person in there, because there's going to be a point that you've got to go and have the tough conversation, and you can't be afraid. You can't admire it. You can't be afraid of it. And in some cases, things need to get uncomfortable before they get comfortable.
Are you comfortable having uncomfortable conversations, Steve?
Very. I mean, my job is to untie knots. That's my job.
Have you always been that way, or did you learn it over time?
You know, what I've learned was that you can't be afraid to have the tough conversation. You can never be afraid, because if you don't have it, then somebody else will. And or you just won't get to the objectives. You gotta leave it on the field. And this is where you gotta balance things out. Like, I've had some of the best sellers in the world when I was a first-time manager. They were the best relationship people, the best. But they couldn't close because they couldn't have the tough conversation. So my job as the RVP in that case was to have those tough conversations and to leverage their strength and leverage my strength. And so you need that balancing act. You need to team.
Can you learn to have hard conversations? I suck at it, Steve. I just want people to like me.
Well, people will like you. Just because you're having a tough conversation doesn't mean they're not going to like you. You know?
Yeah, but it's easier when you're just like Mr. Nice Guy. You know, being everyone's friend, it's easier.
I mean, look, some people will never be able to have those tough conversations. Some people won't want to have it. And it doesn't mean that they're not good at what they do. It's just, this is where you may need to tee it up so someone else can have that tough conversation.
Steve, listen, I could talk to you all day. I do want to do a quick fire. So I'm going to pepper you with questions. You're going to give me your thoughts. How does AI impact the future of sales, Steve?
AI is going to make people smarter, and is going to bring information to them so they have better insights on how to have smarter conversations with their customers.
Will AI replace reps, RevOps, enablement?
I mean, who knows what it's going to be 5-10 years from now. I look at my kids and what they do and how they interact with technology. And I think there'll be parts of the market that it does replace, like maybe more some of the transactional business, maybe some of kind of inbound capabilities. But I think we're a bit away from that. I think people are going to be over rotating in some cases, and they're going to learn. It's kind of like the IVR. Remember, we used to call an IVR and you'd be like, press 1, and you'd speak into the phone, and it wasn't the best experience. I think there's going to be some of that, but I do think over time it will. But I think it's our philosophy and my view is it's going to give you better insights on what to do next.
Tell me, what sales tactic has not changed over the last 5 years?
Solving business problems. I think you still have to be able to, you always had to be able to solve business problems.
What sales tactic has died a death?
The adage of let's go golfing and let's go and hang out on the weekends and go and kind of all those things are just like not as, I think people look at their time, and I think that's changing a bit in terms of like all the different lunches and, you know, the golfing and those things have changed.
Sadly, no Taylor Swift concerts on the horizon.
Maybe.
If you ever fancy it, I'm here. You know, right here. Tell me about a deal you've closed, but you've had to do something creative to get it over the line.
So creativity could be around how you financially structure something that shows that it's a win-win for both of us, where you may have to both have to put some skin in the game to come together on how you're going to work together to solve a problem. Creativity could be that someone's on vacation and you need to figure out how to find the person on vacation so they will sign the contract, because their timeline might not be your contract. But I've had times where people have been skiing, and this is where it gets a little, you want to balance out not being like creepy, but like you find out that where they are on vacation, you might just send them flowers and just, hey, just remember, I'm out there, just remember me. I've had reps do that where they might find out, not in a creepy way because they built the relationships.
No, I totally get that. A creative seller is always encouraged. Tell me, what one piece of advice would you give to a new sales leader? Someone starting a new sales leadership role. What would you tell them the night before? This
is kind of a crazy thing that just kind of came to mind. I saw this quote the other day. So, someone gave me advice, and I'll tell you what this is. Someone gave me advice when I was in college, same advice. And I walked into a restaurant. I was sitting at the bar with another person was sitting next to me. And I was waiting for my parents to meet me to go have dinner. I was just graduating college. And this guy was sitting at a bar and he looks to me and he says, I can give you any advice, know your trade before you're ready to move to the next role. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I'm like, what do you mean know my trade? Like, what does that really mean? And then it hit me. Like I started my career, I was in recruiting, and then I moved in, I was an SDR. And what he meant was like, know your trade. So when you're an SDR, get really good at being an SDR before you're ready to go into sales. And then get really good at enterprise sales or whatever you're selling before you're ready to move into management. And I wasn't ready to move into management until I started to have kids and I got married, because my life changed. Like the way I thought about things changed. And so I took that advice and I would say, don't move until you're ready to move. Some people move too quick, because if I did that too quick, I couldn't give the advice I give to people, because I've lived their roles. I lived in those roles. And I think it's really important that people try to move on too quick. I've seen so many first line managers just want to do anything to be a second line manager, but they're not ready for it. And I've seen sellers who want to be first line managers, but they're not ready for it. They're not in a good headspace.
Do you think they agree with you that they're ready for it? Most often they think they are.
They think they are. Most often they think they are. I think something in some cases like that's a change within your life. Like if you get married, all of a sudden you have to think differently. You're thinking about you and somebody else. You start to have kids. You're thinking about your thought process changes. And I'm not saying that's how it worked for me. So I would give that same advice, is that, study, be obsessed with what you're trying to do, and be obsessed with learning. And there's this quote I heard the other day. It's like, why is a lion the king of the jungle? If you think about it, like why? They're not the strongest. Like the elephant is the strongest. They're not the fastest. The cheetah is the fastest. There's many animals that are smarter than them in the jungle, but they're obsessed with winning, and they're obsessed with winning. And and I think that's what the people, they need to be obsessed with learning. They need to be obsessed with improving. They need to be obsessed with improving. And when I see people do deals, big deals, is because they're obsessed with the customer. They're obsessed with the relationship, and they're maniacally focused, and they're going to do whatever they possibly can to win. There's people that hate to lose, but there's not many people that really know how to win. You got to be obsessed with winning.
I always say you have to earn the right to do the next thing. And I think that's very similar to the know your trade.
Yeah.
So I love that. How did having children change your operating mindset towards work?
A lot of salespeople are selfish. Right? They're selfish with their time. They're selfish. I don't think there's any better job than being an enterprise salesperson with a great company and a great market with a great product. All I had to do was think about myself, my schedule, my time, my schedule. That's all I cared about. But when I started to have kids, like my schedule, my personal schedule changed. I had to be a little more organized. I had to think for other people. And now I have 3 kids. I had to think about, them and my family. And so it started to get me thinking, you go from catching the ball in the end zone as a seller to being on the sideline coaching the team and being able to having kids. I'm trying to teach them and help them and get them to be great people and have integrity. And so it just changed me to think, I want to help coach people and coach salespeople to get them to be the best of them. Now I love watching people improve. I love watching people get promoted. I love if I say something and all of a sudden I see them put it in action, or they tell me what they did and through a coaching initiative. I love that. I wasn't thinking like that before I had kids. It was all about me.
I love that. That's it's quite a development. Now, a final one, otherwise I can just keep going all day, but it's what company sales strategy around you that you've seen do you go, that's really impressive. I'm impressed by that.
Back in the day when we were at Salesforce, I think Salesforce did it so good. I spent almost 10 years at Salesforce. I know that you had listened to your interview with Mark Benioff, and he cultivated such a culture of perfection that people wanted to win for him. And he cultivated so many incredible leaders. And that company just had such an incredible sales process. Because if you think about our market, you can say, well, at that point, Siebel and Oracle were the big, PeopleSoft, SAP, Microsoft. No one even knew about Salesforce. He just created so much talent around a process that we built a process around helping companies be more agile, be more flexible, put your data in the cloud. Were you crazy? Put your data in the cloud. But our sales process was around, hey, let's show you, trust us. We'll show you our security. We'll show you our uptime and downtime in the market. and we would be very transparent with our customers. And we just had such an incredible sales process designed and built around what made us great and what made us unique that nobody could compete.
Steve, I didn't send you the schedule before this show, which was very uncharacteristic of us. Normally we do. I'm really pleased that I didn't, because you would have gone, that was not what we agreed upon in the schedule. These shows are really why I love doing what I do. It's so great to have such a natural discussion. Thank you so much for being so brilliant, and I've just loved this.
No, I loved it. I appreciate the conversation, and just flowed nice. And yeah, I appreciate I appreciate your curiosity, by the way.